This most,
Usually
may be the most
10 to 15
timely
minutes at the end of
program
your brief
we've had in
before
the
1
Kiwanis
o'clock
Club in
for
a
Q&A.
number of decades with the Ukrainian and Russian situation and the Israelis and the Iranian situation. The military is on high alert, and it's uncertain just what's going to happen as far as the U.S. military is going to be doing tomorrow and the next
You
week
gotta hold
and
that
next
microphone
month.
real
So
close to your mouth.
this is very, very
The
timely.
old guys in the back.
Our speaker today is Dan Bishop, who is a retired U.S. Army officer. He made it all the way to colonel. You know, that's just one step away from having stars and having everybody bow down to you. So, and Pat Shaw got to that same point. So apparently it was not a whole lot of bowing there, but you were close. It was good. Anyway, the program today is aimed at the Army's outlook. And clearly, anybody who reads the paper and follows the war situations in the Middle East realizes that the military is not the military that we knew from World War II or from Korea or from Vietnam or from the Middle East back in the right at the turn of the century. It's a new world out there, and that's what we want to hear some things about, along with some other experiences. Dan Bishop, Colonel Dan Bishop, retired after 26 years in the service. Was born in Northern California. He's one of the latest examples of people who have found out how great the world is when you get out of California. So here is a man who has just moved to Kingsport in the last few months. I mean, this is a classic case right here of who's going to come next from wherever in California. So congratulations, welcome home.
Thank you.
Dan born in California. His father was in the Air Force, and he went to school in California at University of California in Santa Barbara, and went through the ROTC program, commissioned as second lieutenant, and served 26 years. And he and Pat both, I keep looking at Pat because I look over here, they look kind of a little bit alike if you look at them carefully. They both had many similar situations. Both of them made 6 promotions in the military, which is really a great accomplishment. So my hat's off to you. It's a great service, and the military is an extremely wonderful place. Another combination, both these guys got into the Army single, and both of them found their wives in combat. I'm not sure who wins that situation, but they both, one in Germany and one in the Middle East. So both of them are not old-time married, even having been in the Army for 26 years. They're relatively young husbands, and this is an indication that they spent a lot of time with the Army. And his wife, Dan's wife, was a native of Rochester, New York. So there's a link here, even in Kingsport, with Rochester and Eastman. So it's a small world. Dan was detailed to armor as a specialty as an officer, and was in the 1st Armored Division in Germany at one time. And then he moved into military intelligence, which is an interesting area and which is highly regarded and is very active. Then he wound up moving to Fort Bragg, and Fort Bragg is either the 82nd Airborne or Special Forces. So here's a man who has got the march from Special Forces, and those Special Forces situation took him on one tour of Afghanistan and 4 tours of Iraq. So here's a man who's seen people who were not friendly to us, and that made it through, and is walking on his own feet and doing great. So That's certainly a commendable thing. He then went to a tour of the Pentagon. Everybody that goes up in the military seems to go through the Pentagon eventually. I don't know what they do there, but he's a graduate of that. And then he was detailed to East Tennessee State University as an ROTC instructor, and was there for 2 years, and began to find how great East Tennessee is. Then he went back into regular Army service for 3 more years when he was promoted to colonel, and then he came back to the ROTC program at ETSU again, and retired from the military in 2021. And now, 4 years later, he's still in the area of the military. He's the director of military and veteran services in Johnson City, and there's a great community of ex-military people in Upper East Tennessee, and he's involved with being sure that they are well cared for and that the systems that are there to support them really work. As I said a moment ago, he recently moved to Kingsport, so he's one of the newest of the people who found God's country right here in East Tennessee. So please help me welcome Dan Bishop.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, took my phone up here just to try to keep myself on track. Donna might have threatened me. Said I can't talk too long. Thanks very much thanks for the introduction and all of you for having me. Super proud to be residents of Kingsport. We definitely found the forever home on the lake. Please God, it's the forever home because I never want to move again. But we're very proud to be here in the Kingsport community. Interesting story before I really kick off, though. I was at the Pentagon. My wife had made it clear that my time in the Army was over, or our marriage was over. So I think I picked the right course. And interestingly enough, I've got a son at Milligan that's going to school, and I was trying to get my daughter to drink the Kool-Aid and come out here to go to college at East Tennessee or at Milligan. And both my kids are soccer players. So I came out here on a recruiting visit, and President Nolan just talked about how the Lord works. President Nolan got wind that we were in town and said, "Hey, is there any way we can get you out of the Washington, D.C. area and come back home to Tennessee?" And it was just like, "Well, yes, please," which is how I ended up back at East Tennessee State. Please don't hold it against me that I'm from California or my wife's from New York. I know sometimes that's got a negative stigma. I'll walk you through real quickly. In case you've been living under a rock, our 250th birthday for the United States Army was this last weekend. Had a great parade in Washington, D.C. If you didn't see it, you can check it out on YouTube. But raise your hand if you're a veteran. Okay, Army, raise your hand. Navy, sir, I know we got you back there. Air Force, Marine Corps, any Space Force folks out here? No, we're all too old. We are the senior service, just to be clear. There you go. And so what I'd really like to talk about here is you'll see the agenda, the Army mission, some thoughts on the changing nature of warfare really over the course of the last 25 years. Kind of give you a big picture on what your taxpayer money is getting, what the Army is costing you, what the Army personnel strength currently looks like. We've certainly faced some challenge over the last few years, but are trending well. And then when I talked to Ken at breakfast a couple months ago, I had a pretty good idea what I wanted to talk about, but no kidding how quickly things change. Secretary of Defense and the Army Secretary pushed out new guidance to the force. Secretary of Defense at the end of April, and then the 1st of May, I'm going to walk you through the Army Transformation Initiative, the guidance that the Army Secretary has put out to the force. It's going to guide our transformation out until about 2050. You'll see the mission of the Army. This is very corporate sounding. This is what it is and what we call joint doctrine. And so you see it does sound very corporate and in the mission. The one that if you're a soldier, I think that we like a lot better is if you go into our Army Field Manual 3-0, which covers sort of our operations Bible and how we conduct our operations. It's much more basic, but better sounding, I think, is close with and destroy the enemy. That is the Army's fundamental mission. Now, this is a lot of words, and I apologize for the small print. I'm going to walk you through just the high points on this. And again, in the interest of time, I promise I won't kill you with too much information. But some thoughts on sort of fundamental changes that I think we've observed over the course of the last few decades. And you'll see that rise of asymmetric and hybrid threats. And just think about it. You know, back before 2001, before 9/11, some of us had, certainly in the intelligence community, we had heard about it. But how many of you had heard of ISIS or Al Qaeda or Al Shabaab or the Houthis? Maybe you had heard of Hezbollah or Hamas, but those are all non-state actors that we have certainly had to face over the course of the last couple of decades. And interestingly enough, not surprising, none of them really want to go toe-to-toe with the United States Army. And so you're seeing irregular tactics being used, and certainly you see it. We are seeing it in Gaza with Hamas in Israel, where an organization, a non-state actor like Hamas, is embedding itself in the civilian population, which makes it much harder to fight them and causes enormous additional collateral damage among the surrounding civilian population. It certainly makes combat much more complicated and dangerous. And then hybrid warfare. And a good example that I thought about this is the Russian occupation of the Crimea back in 2014. I'm not sure how many of y'all were tracking on exactly how that happened, but we call it was Russia sent what you call little green men into Crimea. They were in green uniforms, no name tapes, no unit designation, certainly not a Russian Federation flag on their shoulder, but they infiltrated light infantry and special operations forces in the Crimea over the course of several weeks. There was a very muted response from the international community, and next thing you know, Crimea belongs to Russia. So that's a good example of what you call non-traditional or hybrid warfare. And what we're seeing now is the emergence of near-peer competition. And I know, like patrol is, a byproduct of the Cold War. And when the wall came down and the Russian Empire collapsed, for lack of a better term, we stood alone as the only true global superpower, and that is no longer the case. And when you look at obviously the troubles we're having with Russia writ large as an international community, they're a threat. The Chinese are an emerging threat, no doubt, and are a peer competitor. I would say they've gone past the near peer, and they are a peer competitor. And then there's a tier below it that is, I'd say, not peer, but certainly scary, and that includes Iran and North Korea. And so we have to look at operating in a contested environment. I've got a great example here. Not a single time in my 26 years in the Army did I ever have to look up into the sky and be afraid that the enemy had a capability, either a manned or unmanned aircraft, that could harm me. Not a single time was I ever afraid of that. Now, we'd get hit by rockets and artillery from time to time, but never sustained indirect fire. That is fundamentally changed as of late, and that is the environment that our Army has got to face and be prepared to face in the coming warfare. Proliferation of precision long-range fires. I'm going to talk a lot about this moving forward, so I'm going to move on from that. Dominance of unmanned autonomous systems. So think drones, and give you a sense on how much these have really exploded over the course of the last 2 decades. Almost 20 years ago, and I wish he was here because Miles Burdine and I were actually in Iraq at the same time in OIF2. I belonged to 1st Cavalry Division. He obviously a Marine Corps, but our brigade was cut over to the Marine Corps to fight in Fallujah and Ramadi. So Miles and I were actually in the same place back in the day. It tells you how small the world is as we were trading some war stories. But as a company commander, I had 2 what you called UAV platoons. And for a total of 8 aircraft supporting the 1st Cavalry Division. The Army's plan moving forward over the course of the next few years is to field 1,000 unmanned aerial systems per division. And so just think about that scale. And what my UAVs had, they were called Shadow UAVs, a little bit bigger than a table, purely reconnaissance. But now the unmanned aerial systems are all different sizes. You've got small handheld drones that are pushed down to infantry squads for reconnaissance. And we have some larger drones that are pretty exciting too, that'll be able to do unmanned logistics. And so instead of sending convoys on a dangerous road to resupply forward units, we might be able to do those with unmanned systems, both ground and air unmanned systems. And then a strike capability as well. And you could see that. You could YouTube what the Ukrainians are doing and vice versa to Russian armor using literally commercial off-the-shelf toys with a makeshift explosive that they're dropping into an open turret of a Russian T-72 and being able to destroy it at a super affordable cost. Digitalization and battlefield network, for any of you that deal with communications in general, you can only imagine, especially with that 1,000 unmanned aerial systems all transmitting a picture, that having the network available, just massive amounts of data. And it's easier to do when you've been in Iraq for 15 years because you can establish that infrastructure to push that kind of data quickly. The Army needs to be able to do that, getting out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and getting into location X in the world within 48 hours, and have that same network capability, which is, you can imagine, is an astronomical lift just to be able to talk effectively. Cyber and information warfare, and really the foot stomp on this one is when you think about it, with some very few exceptions, really since World War I, when you look at really what we stepped forward and became a superpower, we've been able to field, train, equip, and deploy our forces, certainly the Army, here from the continental United States without fear of being attacked. We could do that from the safety of the continental United States. And that has fundamentally changed. And not just with the invention of long-range missiles and rockets, which certainly can hit the United States, but I think perhaps more dangerous is that the cyber threat, where you can have a Chinese operative, sitting in the safety of Beijing, reach out and absolutely shut down logistics nodes here in the United States or transportation nodes, such that we can't even get the force forward to fight our wars. And so that is certainly a fundamental change that has popped up over the last few decades. Gray zone conflict. Another good example here is what you're seeing, the Russian shadow fleet in the Baltic Sea, where you get these commercial vessels that conveniently forget to pull up their anchor, and they drag an anchor along the Baltic and tear up all of the communications lines. That is certainly an example of this gray zone conflict that's sort of below the threshold of traditional combat. And then lastly, logistics and sustainment challenges. Logistics has always been the most critical, and there's a couple great quotes that are out there. You can General Pershing, and then there's also General Barrow, Marine officer, similar quotes on logistics, but Pershing said, "Tactics wins battles, logistics wins wars." And that was the same for the Roman Empire, and it certainly is the same for the United States Army moving forward. So give you an idea of what you're paying for. Total budget this last year, $842 billion for Department of Defense, and there's talk about that budget creeping up to $1 trillion for DoD. And you'll see the Army slice of that is $185 billion, about 22% of the total budget, which is, you'll see from a numbers perspective, I think you're getting pretty good value for your taxpayer money with the Army. At the risk of getting, and Admiral, you'll appreciate this, at the risk of getting hit by lightning as a soldier, it's probably appropriate that the Navy's got the largest budget, just when you look at the direction that the U.S. is going from a strategy perspective, China-focused, Pacific-focused. Now, what's not, I didn't break out, I apologize for any of the Marines in the audience, is that Navy budget of $230 billion includes about $60 billion that goes to the United States Marine Corps. But there is a logical reason of why the Navy is taking the a bigger piece of the pie when it comes to our DoD budget. Army specific, you'll look at our numbers, and I've got all of the different services on here, but again, the United States Army is by far the largest, just short of 975,000. Now that includes active, National Guard, and reserve forces, and I got a better slide to kind of break out here. On the far left, this is what the Army looked like back in World War II. You can see just short of 9 million service members at the end of World War II in 1945. And they fielded 91 divisions in the field for the United States Army. And you can, and it's hard to see on the slide here, but the red band at the very top of that column, that's the reserve force. That sort of dark orange next band is National Guard, and the light orange that certainly shows the preponderance of the force during World War II was the active component. And then as you see, it's a downward step after World War II, a slight uptick during the Vietnam War, and then for the most part, relative consistency following the Gulf War, where we moved from 18 divisions down to 10 divisions, and the Army actually reflagged an 11th division last year, the 11th Airborne Division up in Alaska to cover the Arctic and the Pacific. Now what I did on the right-hand side is I broke out by component what that 951,000 looks like. Active duty is 452,000, National Guard 325,000, and Army Reserve is 174,000. Here's a critical data point there. Is when you look at the modern Army today, when you add the National Guard and Reserve Force, they are larger than our active force. And so what critically important, because when we go to war tomorrow against I don't care who, we will not be able to fight that war without our Reserve and National Guard brothers and sisters, at least not for prolonged combat. I pulled out some data here. It's not on the slide, but your sons and daughters from here in Tennessee at a 278th Armored Cavalry Regiment, which is the only remaining heavy armored cavalry regiment in the National Guard that remains in existence. This is to give you an idea of how busy they've been. So these are part-time soldiers, citizen soldiers. So 278th, and this is just this unit. 2018 to 19, they were in Kuwait for Operation Spartan Shield. 2020 to 2021, they were in Poland for a NATO support mission. 2021 to 2022, they were one of the last U.S. military elements to leave the Ukraine, as they were forward deployed to train the Ukrainians prior to the invasion. 2025, 2026, we actually pushed out the first element of the 278th for rotation, a training rotation back to Germany. They'll be training Ukrainians in Germany over the course of the next year or so. And then they're also on schedule for 2 different deployments, again, going back to Kuwait and Operation Spartan Shield through 2026 and 2028. And we've got Tennessee Guardsmen on the southern border supporting that operation, border security operation. So that highlights the critical importance of the role that the reserves play tied to the active force. So this is where things got dicey, or exciting, I'll say, over the course of the last several months. Now, how this usually works is you'll get a new administration comes in and they'll issue a national security strategy, and that's usually generated 6 to 12 months into a new administration. So President Trump's not behind here. We hope to see a new national security strategy from the White House within the next 6 months or so. But then everything sort of snowballs. That national security strategy leads to the Secretary of Defense generating a national defense strategy. The Joint Chiefs does a national military strategy, and then each of the services has supporting strategies as well. So you can see this is it's a long, drawn-out process. We're sort of skipping ahead a little bit. Again, still waiting on national security strategy. The Secretary of Defense issued some interim national defense strategic guidance at the end of April. And so you see his priorities. Strategic focus on China. Obviously focus on the Pacific. Interestingly enough, you see that the wording there, emphasis on defending Taiwan against coercion. And if you recall, our policy, there's been a lot of sort of strategic ambiguity from multiple administrations on how we would react if China invaded Taiwan. Now, this has still got a little ambiguity in there, but a lot less than previous administrations. And you'll see that they used coercion instead of invasion. But certainly an emphasis tied to focus on China that I thought was particularly interesting. Homeland defense enhancement, strengthening missile and drone defense, and you probably heard a little bit about that. Initial discussions on this Golden Dome system, and it'll be multiple systems that have different defensive layers to protect the homeland from missile and drone attack, and then addressing fentanyl trafficking as a security issue. And really, the secretaries made multiple comments about border security as national security. I think the president has said that a few times as well. So that has worked into the Homeland Defense enhancement priority. And then force modernization for future threats, and I'm going to kind of walk you through some of those ideas that at least have rolled down from the secretary and then to the Army specifically. You cannot see this memo that I have in the center of the slide, but you can Google it. It was published on the 1st of May, and if you just Google Army Guidance 1 May, Secretary Driscoll, General George, you will find it. You'll be able to read it for yourself. But I'm summarizing here for you, so hopefully this will do. And General Driscoll is the Chief of Staff of the Army. Objective: reshape the Army into a leaner, more lethal, and tech-enabled force to face modern threats. Goal is to achieve full multi-domain operation capability by 2030. And on the right-hand slide, what does that really mean? What is multi-domain operations? It's the ability to operate across air, land, sea, space, and cyber domains, integrate fires, maneuver, information, and logistics. And then this multi-domain task force will lead the MDO experimentation. And what that really means is that, in very simple terms, we're going to throw as much of this new tech down to the field to the lowest level as possible, as quickly as possible. And we're going to have some stuff that doesn't work. But the best, most efficient way to figure out what does work for the guys and gals on the ground that are actually in contact with the enemy is to get that down there to them as quickly as possible so they can actually experiment with it. And then you'll see a very aggressive timeline. So 2025, this year, and there's some acronyms there, some key systems. I'm going to talk you through those. Pre-strike munitions, and then NGCV is Next Generation Combat Vehicle. And that full multi-domain task force, like the first unit that's going to have that MDO capability to be fielded by 2028, with the rest of the Army to follow no later than 2030. And so for those of you that might have past lives and actually fielding equipment in whatever industry you're working in, we'll see how this works. And then we'll see what Congress does in terms of appropriations. So this is a little bit redundant. Just a few high points here is, again, I talked about procurement efforts. Procurement has been a disaster for Department of Defense for decades now. The only positive I have to spend on the Army is our toys cost a lot less in comparison to Air Force aircraft and Navy ships. And so where we have failed, ours have not been as expensive as some of the other services, but it's still a disaster. So rapid innovation cycles, agile procurement, trying to buy as much commercial off-the-shelf equipment that's already proven. Optimized force structure. We're reducing the number of general billets we have in the Army, so it was a good time for me to retire. And pushing a lot of those headquarters staff down to the field. Some merging of headquarters that in the interest of time, I'll leave for another time. And that last point is ongoing effort transformation. They call it transformation in contact. And so it's not good enough to just field equipment that currently works, but we need to be on the cutting edge of technology as it emerges and try to push that technology as far forward as quickly as possible. A good example is Starlink. We're stealing Elon Musk's Starlink and using that for expeditionary capability for communications. Six modernization priorities, and I've got some pictures here to show you what some of this stuff looks like, but you'll see long-range precision fires, next-generation combat vehicles, future vertical lift, Army network, air missile defense, and soldier lethality. Those are Secretary of the Army's modernization priorities. And I'll very briefly go over some of these, and if I was a tanker and then an intelligence officer. If you ask me too much about artillery systems, I might get a little lost, but I'm going to do the best I can. This long-range precision fires, and you're going to see that there's an emphasis for those of you that might have been in the Army before or had a field artillery background. Don't get your feelings hurt. We're still going to have good old-fashioned cannon tube artillery, but there is a deliberate shift away from traditional tube artillery cannons and a focus on rockets and missiles. And so you'll see that there's a trend here, or a theme, where they've got short, mid-range, and long-range systems. And so that one on the left-hand side, Precision Strike Missile, PRSM, is the shorter range. Now you're seeing some earlier versions of this being used by the Ukrainians against the Russians. So when you see those Ukrainian tracks and they pop up that rocket pod and you see the rockets go off over the horizon that are hitting deep targets, that's actually for our future Army going to be considered a more short range system, which talk about how things have changed just since I got in the Army. We're talking, this can reach out over 300 miles, and this is the short range system. And you'll see that future enhancements are looking at, unfortunately, it's not really good at hitting moving targets. So like this is great for a headquarters position or a supply dump, something that's not moving. So future increments that they're working on will be able to have this reach out and touch moving targets or see targets. And you'll see a increment 4, which is planned, will take this weapon system 1,000 kilometers. And so we're talking 600 plus miles. Again, that's the short range system. And then the mid-range system is the bottom right. It's called the Typhoon. And again, sir, we're stealing some ideas from the Navy. So we're stealing Navy systems and repurposing them for ground warfare. So we're taking Tomahawks and SM-6 multi-role missiles that the Navy uses and putting them on land. And that'll allow us to reach out to between 300 and 1,100 miles. Then finally, you probably heard a lot about the hypersonic weapons that are so dangerous. The Russians are already field hypersonic weapons. There's been some reports, I'm not sure if I believe it or not, of the Iranians using hypersonic weapons with technology they probably got from the Chinese and Russia against Israel. We'll be fielding our own hypersonic weapons. And so that long-range hypersonic weapon system, it'll travel at Mach 5 with a range of 1,724 miles. And so these are systems that on the battlefield, when I was a young lieutenant, I could have never dreamt of. And then again, why rockets? Again, without killing you with too much data, I just want to highlight a couple things. You'll see under range, the Excalibur artillery round is our best traditional artillery round that goes in the tube and goes out the tube. That can reach out to about just over 31 miles. Now, rocket assisted, you might be able to get a little bit more length, but compare that to those ranges that I just talked about with those other rocket and missile systems, and it's just a whole different ball game when you're looking at future capability. Now, these are super expensive, and you as taxpayers probably need to know it. Each one of those Excalibur artillery rounds, it's costing you $150,000 per round. And so, again, someone else can do the quick math, but if you're looking at when in combat, you've got a 6-gun battery of 155 howitzers supporting you, 12 to 18 rounds per minute, sustained fire. You can do the math, how much that's going to cost you as taxpayers to just supply the ammunition. Rockets are equally as expensive, so this is not a cheap man's business, that's for sure. Next generation combat vehicle, and I know I gotta hustle here, but we're not getting rid of tanks. On the bottom right hand corner, you'll see the M1E Abrams, which will be the latest generation. I would guess, and I might get hit by lightning by saying this, it might be the last that we field with the United States Army. The Marine Corps has already mothballed all their M1 tanks, which I know I married into a Marine Corps family. It hurts my father-in-law's heart. But then you'll see some other systems too. We're still going to have some armored systems. Now the one on the bottom left, the M10 Booker, was supposed to be fielded as part of this initiative, and it would provide tank-like armor, heavier armor support to divisions like the 82nd or light infantry units. From what I can tell, the Secretary has canceled that, which was a shock because it had already been approved and ready for not just experimentation but fielding over the course of the next few years. So that's gone. But then upper left is XM30, which will replace our Bradley fighting vehicle. The robotic combat vehicle is not replacing anything. That's brand new. So as the name implies, it's robotic, and they're going to have different systems. And the one that I snipped the picture of is the light system. They're going to have light, medium, and heavy systems to field in a great way, like the Ukrainians are doing this right now with light robotic systems. You get a squad that's pinned down and is taking some casualties, and you don't have the ability to get out there and evac wounded. They're sending these light robotic combat vehicles. They're still getting knocked out periodically, but much better that a light robotic combat vehicle goes into danger and takes fire than having another manned vehicle go out and try to recover casualties. And then the upper right is armored multi-purpose vehicle, which is for those of you that were in the Army 600 years ago. We had the M113. We're finally getting rid of those, and that'll be replaced by that multi-purpose vehicle. I think the most exciting part of this, I think, is we're not getting rid of helicopters completely, but everyone knows what a Black Hawk helicopter looks like. That is going to be replaced by the V-28 Valor. It's already been selected. This is what it's going to be for the United States Army. And we stole some concept from the Marine Corps, with a tilt rotor. And so the Valor will be able to take off and land with its rotors facing up like a helicopter. So it'll be able to land anywhere, just like a Black Hawk. But then once it gains altitude, it shifts those rotors down and it flies like a traditional fixed-wing aircraft. Still the same lift capability from just weight perspective. They're faster, longer range, and what we did learn a lesson from the Marine Corps Osprey, the location of the rotors is such that you can only put a 50 caliber machine gun on the back ramp facing the rear, because side gunners would end up shooting your own propeller off. The Army is putting those propellers in a manner where we'll have side gunners as well. And then the one on the bottom is still a concept. It has not been decided on, but we had smaller reconnaissance helicopters called OH-58s. Little birds is what we call them, smaller helicopters for reconnaissance, light attack. Those went away from the active force, but the plan is to replace them with either this Sikorsky Raider or Bell 360 Invictus, which look like traditional helicopters. Air and missile defense systems we talked about just very briefly, and you'll see again this is sort of an idea where you're going to have this is what the Golden Dome will in part look like. Long term or long range, what you don't see on this is Patriot and terminal high altitude area defense called THAAD, which gets all like, hey, the intercontinental ballistic missiles that are being shot at us from fill in the blank. Your Patriots and THAAD are going to deal with that threat. At the short and mid range, we're going to steal the Iron Dome from Israel. It's not really stealing. We helped them develop it. But you could see the Iron Dome working every single night if you turn on your news. We're going to field that system for the Army for short range engagements. And then we'll field a separate mid range system called Integrated Fire Protection Capability. And that last one, it's not nearly as sexy because it doesn't shoot anything, but it's going to be the best radar in the world when it comes to picking up ballistic missile, rocket, UAV threat. Again, and it doesn't matter how good of a shooter system you have. If you can't actually identify where the enemy is, it's hard to shoot them. And then the last slide I promise here is I feel a little guilty. I knew I was going to run out of time. So the last three priorities: shoulder lethality, Army networks, which we talked about briefly, and then other concepts. I think I've hit most of these previously in the talk. The only thing that I'm really excited about is under that soldier lethality. That synthetic training environment is going to be, when you look at AI or alternate reality type opportunities out there, where we don't necessarily have to send our soldiers to Fort Polk, Louisiana for 60 days. We can save a whole heck of a lot more taxpayer money if we could perhaps get them in a simulation center and be able to do that right at their home station. I think that's going to open up a whole different opportunities from a training perspective for the force. That was a lot to cover. And Ken, I hope I scratched at least a little bit of the itch. But it is an interesting world we live in, obviously, with all the threats that are out there. As I said, guidance is still coming out. When that national security strategy does come out, and as citizens, I'd encourage you to read it. There's an unclassified version, and then there's separate classified annexes, which you will not have access to, quite obviously. But take the time to read that unclassified annex when you get, or unclassified base document when it comes out, and really figure out and really see what your administration is steering the Department of Defense towards. In there and be open to any questions.